think about this. The most dangerous thing you can do when studying spiritual warfare is, to give Satan way too much credit.
Oh, absolutely.
Ah.
We functionally treat him like God's evil twin.
Right, like they're equal and opposite. But the biblical reality is that he's just a localized, finite creature on a very short leash.
Yep.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a stack of your seminary notes, specifically for Systematic Theology module ST213B.
Right, the one covering angels, demons, and spiritual discernment.
Exactly. And our mission today is to extract the core insights from this material, cut through the cultural noise, and fundamentally reshape how you view the unseen realm.
Because normally when we talk about spiritual warfare, our imagination immediately goes to, like, a Hollywood movie poster.
Oh, totally.
God is on one side, Satan is on the other, and they're locked in this cosmic arm wrestling match. Like, they're sweating it out for the universe.
Which is, it's a very visually dramatic concept, but it's an absolute superstitious dualism.
Yeah.
Light versus dark, spirit versus matter. It fundamentally misrepresents the ontological reality of who God is and what creatures are.
Right. And then if you swing the pendulum to the exact opposite extreme in our modern secularized world, that movie poster is just completely torn down.
Yeah, everything is psychologized.
Exactly. Every evil, every malice, every systemic corruption, it's just a chemical imbalance or, sociological phenomenon or a glitch in our evolutionary biology.
So the spiritual realm is entirely erased.
Erased, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're caught between giving the devil too much power or pretending he just doesn't exist at all.
It's the definition of a false dichotomy. We're forced to choose between that sensationalized dualism on the one hand and, a sterile, reductive naturalism on the other.
Right.
But if we anchor ourselves in the systematic theology you've been studying, specifically in the prolegomena and the doctrine of creation, a completely different framework emerges.
Yeah, angels and demons are not standalone oddities. If we go back to the discussions on creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, we have to remember that spiritual beings are not divine emanations.
Right, they aren't eternal semi-deities.
No, they haven't always existed alongside God. They were brought into existence by and entirely for the Son.
Which completely sets the stage for where your syllabus is heading next in Christology and soteriology. You really cannot grasp the depths of the hypostatic union, the eternal Son taking on human flesh, or his messianic mission on the cross without understanding this.
Because a core part of that mission was the defeat of these fallen powers.
Exactly. But before we get into the heavy exegesis of how that happens, I want to talk about our posture as students of theology. The goal of this module isn't just to fill your head with esoteric data.
No, theology must lead to doxology. It has to lead to worship.
Right. If our study of the unseen realm is producing fear or paranoia or, obsession, we've gotten way off track. Our goal here is orthopathy, right affections. We want to walk away in awe of Christ's cosmic supremacy.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is most valuable when it actually forms us.
Yeah.
When it's properly ordered and applied to how we live and worship.
So here's a question that I struggle with, and I know a lot of seasoned pastors do too. Why is it so incredibly easy for us to slip into that functional dualism?
Oh, that's a great question.
Even guys who've been in the pulpit for decades, who know the theology, they still catch themselves talking about Satan as if he is God's equal opposite. Why do we default to that?
It's a fascinating intersection of human psychology and theological drift. We naturally inflate what we fear.
Right.
So when you're sitting in a pastoral counseling session and you encounter profound darkness or you're looking at systemic crushing injustice, the sheer weight of that evil feels infinite to us.
Wow, yeah.
And because we're finite creatures, the evil feels uncontainable. So we project an infinite godlike status onto the enemy. We assume that because the pain is overwhelming, the perpetrator must be omnipotent.
That makes a lot of sense. We're basically projecting our own limitations onto the spiritual battlefield.
Precisely. Which is why we need a strict canonical tethering. We have to violently bind our imaginations to the biblical text, because the text consistently demotes Satan and the fallen angels to the status of finite, defeated creatures.
So if we're going to dismantle that dualism, we have to actually look at what the text says these beings are made of. Let's look at their ontology and the scriptural grammar.
Okay, let's do it.
According to Colossians 1.16 and Hebrews 1.15, angels are finite, non-corporeal spiritual beings. They don't have physical bodies. But how does that actually work? I mean, how can something without a physical body be a localized creature?
This is a really great philosophical distinction to make. In classical theology, we talk about three types of presence. Physical bodies have circumscriptive presence.
Meaning they take up measurable space.
Exactly. God has repletive presence. He fills all things infinitely. He is omnipresent. But angels have what we call definitive presence.
Okay, definitive presence.
Right. They don't take up physical volume, but they are definitely here and not there. They are completely subject to spatial constraints.
So they absolutely cannot be everywhere at once.
Emphatically no. And being purely spiritual doesn't mean they're abstract, impersonal forces like gravity or wind. The canonical data shows they possess distinct personality.
Like in 1 Peter 1.12, where it tells us they possess intellect. They actively long to look into the mysteries of salvation.
Yes, and Job 38.7 shows they have emotion. They shouted for joy at the dawn of creation. And Jude 6 makes it explicitly clear they possess moral agency, as some deliberately abandon their proper domain.
So they have intellect, emotion, and will, but they are limited. Matthew 24.36 points out they aren't omniscient. They don't know the day or the hour of the Lord's return. They certainly aren't omnipotent.
Right.
You know, if you strip away all the Renaissance paintings of babies with wings and actually look at the root words like malak in Hebrew or angelos in Koine Greek, it literally just means messenger.
It's a job title, not an anatomy lesson.
That is a crucial point. It's a functional designation. And when the biblical authors speak of the heavenly host, the tzva, we see a highly structured, majestic administration of these messengers and guardians.
Let's actually map that out, because understanding their original design helps us understand the tragedy of the fall.
Okay, so you have the seraphim, the burning ones in Isaiah 6. They seem to be executing the heavenly liturgy surrounding the divine throne, declaring Yahweh's holiness. But what is the mechanism there? Why are they burning?
Well, the imagery of fire in the Old Testament is almost always tied to divine holiness and purification. The seraphim are so close to the unmediated presence of God that they reflect his consuming purity.
Oh, wow.
Their function is liturgical, but it's also mediatorial in a sense.
Yeah.
One of them brings the burning coal to purify Isaiah's lips. They're agents of God's holy presence.
Then you have the cherubim. We see them in Genesis 3 guarding Eden with a flaming sword, and in Exodus 25 sitting on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, and then in Ezekiel 10. Their primary function seems entirely different from the seraphim. They act as these powerful, unyielding guardians of God's sacred space.
Yes, wherever God's space intersects with human space, the cherubim are stationed at the border.
Right.
And then, moving from the throne room outward, we have the named archangels with distinct, massive stewardships in redemptive history.
Like Michael, who shows up in Daniel 10 as this formidable military protector of God's people.
Exactly.
And Gabriel, the chief messenger of the redemptive covenant, who we see in Daniel 8, and delivering the supreme announcement of the incarnation in Luke 1. But as glorious as the tzvat is, this majestic administration fractures.
Yes.
We have to talk about the intrusion of darkness and the fall of Satan. And your syllabus anchors this in Genesis 3.
It has to start in Genesis 3, verses 1 through 15. The serpent, the Nahash, introduces demonic deception. And pay close attention to the mechanism of his attack.
It's not a display of raw power, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He doesn't knock down trees or create a storm. It is an attack on epistemology and divine goodness.
Did God actually say?
Right. He is slandering the benevolence of the Creator, trying to convince the creatures that God is holding out on them.
It's entirely psychological and theological manipulation, but God's response in verse 15 is the anchor of all human history. The proto-evangelium, the first gospel.
Yes.
The promise that the seed of the woman will crush, sup in Hebrew, the head of the serpent. It's the definitive messianic promise that Satan's intrusion will end in his total physical and judicial destruction by Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Now, to understand the origin of that serpentine malice, we have to pull back the lens to look at the secondary redemptive historical backdrop. We find that in the prophetic laments of Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28.
Okay, I have to challenge this here because this is where a lot of modern scholars get very uncomfortable.
Sure.
Historically, on the surface, Isaiah 14 is a lament directed at the king of Babylon, and Ezekiel 28 is directed at the king of Tyre. Aren't we playing fast and loose with hermeneutics by ripping these texts out of their ancient Near Eastern political context and applying them to Satan?
It's a very fair challenge, and we must always start with the immediate historical grammar. However, the language in these passages clearly transcends human monarchy.
How so?
Well, conservative evangelical exegesis has long recognized a typological reality here. In Isaiah 14, you have the figure Helel ben Sahar, the day star, son of dawn. He utters these 5 devastating I will statements. No earthly king from Babylon literally tried to ascend above the stars of God to make himself like the Most High. The earthly king's hubris is being described using the primordial blueprint of cosmic rebellion.
Oh, I see. And in Ezekiel 28, the Edenic imagery makes it almost impossible to strictly limit it to a human king. It explicitly talks about the guardian anointed cherub in Eden on the holy mountain of God, blameless from the day he was created until iniquity was found in him.
Right.
His heart became proud because of his beauty.
Which gives us our profound theology of sin. What is the mechanism of evil? Evil is not an eternal pre-existing principle. It is not an uncreated substance that God had to fight against.
So no dualism.
Exactly. Its genesis is entirely found in creaturely pride and the delusion of pursuing divine autonomy. It is a corruption of original divine goodness.
So if that's his origin, a corrupted creature, how much power does he actually have right now? Because this is where the rubber meets the road for pastoral care.
Absolutely.
The Hebrew word Satan literally means adversary, and the Greek word diabolos means slanderer. But if we want to shatter functional dualism, we have to look at Job 1.
Job 1 is so important here.
Satan appears in the divine council, but he doesn't kick the doors in like a rival king. He literally has to ask for divine fiat, permission to act. He cannot touch a single hair on Job's head without Yahweh specifically allowing it.
The divine council scene demonstrates a profound theological compatibilism. Satan's malice is entirely his own, yet his actions are strictly circumscribed by and ultimately serve Yahweh's sovereign providence. His power is derivative and leashed.
Wait, I have to push back there. If Satan's actions serve God's providence, aren't we dangerously close to making God the author of Job's tragedy? I mean, if God holds the leash and God lets the leash out so Satan can destroy Job's family, how is this not just a divine setup? How do we counsel someone without making God the author of evil?
That is the most difficult, weighty question in all of pastoral theology.
Yeah.
We have to rely on the concept of asymmetrical sovereignty. God stands behind good and evil in fundamentally different ways. God actively authors and stands behind all good.
Okay.
But with evil, God permits it. He sets its exact boundaries, and he ensures that it will ultimately exhaust itself in the service of his redemptive plan. But he does not energetically author the malice itself. The malice belongs 100% to the creature.
So Satan meant it for evil, but God, standing above the entire matrix of creaturely choices, meant it for good.
Yes. Satan is an unwilling tool in the hands of a benevolent creator.
That is a crucial distinction. It preserves God's sovereignty without impugning his goodness.
Right.
So if the biblical text is that strictly defined, if Satan is just a localized, limited creature whose malice is leashed and angels are just ministering spirits, why did the medieval church suddenly become so obsessed with mapping out elaborate angelic hierarchies? What broke down in our theology?
What broke down was canonical restraint. When the biblical text gives us boundaries, human curiosity often wants to trespass them. The desire for hidden knowledge is incredibly potent. In Colossians 2:18, Paul explicitly warns against the worship of angels and dwelling on esoteric visions.
We see it again in Revelation 19 and 22, right? Where John is so overwhelmed by the angelic messenger that he falls down to worship, and the angel sharply rebukes him. He says, "You must not do that. I am a fellow servant. Worship God."
It's such a stark command.
Yeah.
But church history drifted right past those stop signs. You have the post-biblical pseudepigrapha, things like 1 Enoch, which spun out these massive, elaborate backstories and names for angels and demons that simply aren't in the canon.
And then later, you get the incredibly complex, unbiblical rankings of Pseudo-Dionysius, trying to map out exactly who sits where in the heavenly choir.
And you can understand the human impulse. We crave categorization.
Yeah, we want to know how the machinery of the universe works.
Exactly. But what happens is that the messenger eclipses the sender. The focus shifts from the uncreated creator to the fascinated creature. This is precisely why the author of Hebrews dedicates the first 2 entire chapters to a rigorous, relentless defense of Christ's superiority over the angels.
Hebrews 1 and 2 is a masterclass in Christological primacy. The early church was being tempted to elevate angels to mediators. But Hebrews says, no, Jesus is the uncreated creator. He sustains the universe by the word of his power.
The Father commands the angel to worship the Son. The angels are merely ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation.
It was a crucial, necessary corrective. And it was a corrective that the Protestant Reformation brilliantly recovered centuries later.
They had a deep instinct to return to canonical sufficiency.
Right. They looked at the medieval superstructure of angelic veneration, the selling of relics, the intense superstition, and they just stripped it away. They insisted that our understanding of the unseen realm must be rigorously tethered to the written word alone.
But let me ask you this. Did the reformers throw the baby out with the bathwater? In their zeal to strip away superstition, did they accidentally strip the world of its enchantment and pave the way for the secular naturalism we have today?
It's a common critique, but it's a misunderstanding of what the reformers did. They didn't strip the world of enchantment. They recentered the enchantment on the ordinary means of grace.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they took the focus off speculative angelic hierarchies and placed the supernatural reality squarely back on the preached word and the sacraments. They anchored spiritual reality in the objective supremacy of Christ, not in human speculation.
Which brings us directly to the modern landscape, because that human impulse to map the unknown didn't die in the Middle Ages.
No, it just morphed into our current interdenominational debates. As graduate level students, you have to know how to navigate these with both confessional fidelity and deep ecumenical charity. Your syllabus uses a 4-level theological taxonomy to help sort this out. Let's walk through that.
Right. We start at level 1, which is dogma. This is the core truth, the non-negotiable essence of historic Orthodox Christianity.
So at level 1, we absolutely affirm that angels and demons are created finite beings. We affirm creatio ex nihilo.
Right.
And we affirm Christ's ontological superiority and absolute objective victory over Satan. If you lose that, you've lost the Christian gospel entirely.
Precisely. Then we move to level 2, which is doctrine. These are denominational or ecclesial convictions.
Okay, so this is where we see tension, for example, between the historic Reformed tradition's restraint regarding the unseen realm and, say, certain charismatic frameworks that heavily emphasize the extent of territorial demonic hierarchies.
Yes, like the spiritual mapping movement. They look at passages like Daniel 10, where the angel tells Daniel he was delayed by the prince of the kingdom of Persia.
Right, and from that text, they extrapolate a very complex modern geography of the demonic. They believe specific demons rule over specific zip codes or city halls.
But practically speaking, how do you sit across the table from a fellow believer who is heavily invested in mapping out the demonic grid of your city without just sounding like an arrogant academic? I mean, how do we pastorally engage that level 2 difference?
Well, what's fascinating here is the underlying motivation, and that's what you have to speak to. We must first validate their genuine desire for spiritual victory.
Yeah, their serious view of the supernatural is often a very healthy corrective to the reductive naturalism we see in many mainline churches.
Exactly. However, we gently recenter their methodology. We guide them back to apostolic Christology, rather than relying on extra-biblical revelation or experiential mapping. We remind them that our victory isn't secured by successfully decoding the enemy's zip code. It's secured by the finished work of Christ.
If you focus too much on the Prince of Persia, you lose sight of the Prince of Peace, who already disarmed the powers.
That is incredibly helpful. Moving down to level 3, we have theological inferences. These are logical deductions or models we build from the text.
A great example here is our earlier debate about the exegesis of Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Are these passages strictly 100% about earthly kings? Or is the conservative evangelical consensus correct to see that dual redemptive historical backdrop of Satan's primordial fall?
Right, it's a level 3 discussion. We can vigorously debate the hermeneutics, but we remain unified on the level 1 dogma of Satan's origin as a fallen creature.
Exactly. And finally, level 4, speculative opinions. These are the open questions where Scripture is silent, the exact mechanics of how angels operate spatially, or attempts to comprehensively map out the exact differences between the thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities mentioned in Colossians 1.16 beyond what the text actually reveals.
These are areas where we must hold our opinions with a very open hand. Okay, so we've covered the ontology, the history, and the taxonomy of the debates. Let's bring this down to the ground. How does this heavy, systematic exegesis translate into practical church life, preaching, and spiritual formation? Because if this just stays in our heads, we've failed.
We have to view the cross through the lens of a cosmic courtroom. The doctrine of Christus Victor is absolutely essential here.
Let's look at the mechanism of that victory. Go to Matthew 12. Jesus is accused of casting out demons by Beelzebul.
Yeah.
And Jesus responds by talking about binding the strong man. He says you can't plunder a strong man's house unless you tie him up first. The exorcisms Jesus performed weren't just magic tricks to wow the crowds.
No, they were the visible evidence of the inaugurated kingdom invading Satan's domain and liberating the captives.
And the climax of that invasion happens at Golgotha. If we connect this to the bigger picture in Colossians 2:13 through 15, Paul unpacks the exact judicial mechanism of the cross.
This is one of the most glorious passages in all of Scripture. Christ canceled the chirographon, the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands.
He nailed it to the cross.
Yes. And by doing that, Paul says, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame.
So explain how the chirographon actually works in this context.
The chirographon was essentially an ancient certificate of indebtedness, a handwritten IOU. What was the rulers and authorities' only real weapon against believers? It was legal accusation.
Satan is the Satan, the accuser.
His power rests entirely on our objective moral guilt before a holy God. But when Christ pays the debt, when the chirographon is canceled and nailed to the cross, Satan is entirely disarmed. He has no more grounds for accusation.
So instead of just saying the accuser's briefcase is empty, it's more like understanding the jurisdiction of the chirographon, right? It's like Satan as a prosecutor showing up to the cosmic courtroom with a massive itemized folder of all your parking tickets and felonies.
He is ready to throw the book at you. But Jesus didn't just pay the tickets. He bought the entire city, abolished the penal code against you, and dismantled the prosecuting authority. The jurisdiction is completely gone.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The legal framework that empowered the enemy has been obliterated by grace.
So, if the victory is already won objectively, how do we fight subjectively in the here and now?
We go to Ephesians 6:7 through 18, the armor of God. And here's a fascinating nuance in the Greek. Paul tells the church to put on the full armor, but the imperative verb he uses is not attack, it's not advance, it is stenai, to stand firm.
It is entirely defensive warfare. Look at the armor, truth, righteousness, the gospel of peace, faith, salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Every single piece of that armor is a reality grounded entirely in the finished work of Christ.
We are not generating our own righteousness or our own truth to fight the devil.
No, we are standing in the objective reality of what Jesus has already accomplished. You don't have to win a war that has already been won. You just have to hold the ground that Christ purchased.
Let's put this into a real-world ministry case study, because this is where a pastor really earns their keep. Imagine a scenario. You have a male pastor who is dealing with a church elder board that is completely split over a struggling local ministry in their city. It's failing, there is intense interpersonal conflict, and the board is tearing itself apart trying to diagnose the problem.
Oh, a very common, agonizing scenario.
Now, half the board is trapped in that reductive naturalism we talked about earlier. They're saying, there's no spiritual warfare here. It's just poor management, bad demographics, and we need a better spreadsheet, a new marketing strategy, and maybe some conflict resolution seminars. But the other half of the board is trapped in fear-based sensationalism. They are convinced a territorial demon has placed a curse on the building, and they want to spend the next month doing elaborate spiritual mapping, marching around the property, and performing binding rituals over the town. How does the pastor navigate this using the exact theology we've unpacked?
Well, first he has to address the naturalists. He cannot let them reduce the church to a secular corporation. He must gently but firmly remind them of Ephesians 6. Our struggle is not merely against flesh and blood.
He has to reawaken their biblical metaphysics.
Yes. Real, unseen, personal forces are at work in human systems and church conflicts. The adversary loves to exploit interpersonal friction. To deny the spiritual dimension is to deny the text and leave the church vulnerable.
Okay, so he brings the naturalists back to the reality of the supernatural. But what about the sensationalists? How does he stop them from going on a ghost hunt?
With the sensationalists, he must validate their awareness of the spiritual battle, but drastically correct their methodology, using Colossians 2. He reminds them that the strong man is already bound, and the powers are already disarmed.
Right.
He tells them, we don't need esoteric rituals, and we don't need to fear a territorial spirit because Christ owns this territory. He redirects their zealous response away from speculative mapping and toward gospel-centered prayer, preaching the word, the sword of the Spirit, and resting deeply in the judicial triumph of Christ. He tells both sides, we fight the supernatural war using the ordinary means of grace.
That is the perfect middle path of orthodoxy. You acknowledge the reality of the war, but you fight it with the ordinary means of grace because the decisive battle was won on Friday afternoon in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago.
Knowledge applied beautifully to the local church.
Which brings us to the final portion of our deep dive. The goal of parsing out these systematic modules isn't just to pass an exam, it's to shape your affections and demand further reflection. So, based on your syllabus, we have two provocative graduate level reflection questions for you and your study groups to wrestle with.
Question 1. If Satan has been definitively stripped of his legal power of accusation, as we see in the mechanism of the chirographon in Colossians 2.15, in what specific ways do you, or your congregation, functionally live as if he is still the prosecutor of your souls? Where are you still answering his baseless charges in your own thought life?
That is heavy. And question two, think back to our discussion on the divine counsel in Job 1. How does an orthodox understanding of Satan's absolute reliance on divine permission, the reality of asymmetrical sovereignty, fundamentally change your framework for understanding suffering and providence when you're sitting in a counseling room with someone experiencing profound grief?
That changes everything about how you preserve God's goodness while acknowledging the reality of evil.
Before we sign off, there's one mind-bending detail in the biblical grammar we haven't touched on yet, and I want to leave you with it to chew on. We spend so much time looking up at angels, marveling at their power and proximity to God. Right.
But in 1 Corinthians 6.3, Paul is rebuking the church for taking their petty lawsuits to secular courts, and he casually drops this massive theological bombshell. He says, "Do you not know that we are to judge angels?"
Wow.
Think about the implications of that. The cosmic hierarchy is going to be inverted. The redeemed creatures made of dust, the ones who struggled and failed and needed a savior, will one day sit in eschatological judgment over the angelic host. We will participate in the vindication of God's justice over the fallen powers.
It is a staggering reality that demands our worship.
So the next time you're tempted to be terrified of the dark or intimidated by the spiritual realm, remember your trajectory. You are united to the victorious Christ, and one day you will judge the very beings you used to fear.
Amen to that.
The unseen realm is real. The adversary is defeated, and the cosmic courtroom is cleared. We'll see you on the next deep dive.